Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is an exciting time for us, and I'm just going to quickly run down some of the events that we have coming up over the next few days, and then Hank Art is going to introduce the panel today. As everyone can see from the screen, there's another talk tonight with Reed Czar's class of 77, The Future of Environmentalism in a Fractured Country, so I hope you can come to that as well. Tomorrow we have many events for the alumni who are visiting in town. There's a sunrise hike at 7 a.m., which should be interesting, especially if there's freezing rain overnight. But we're on, everything's fine, we have the vans. David, Hank, Drew are ready to lead you out into the wilderness. Tomorrow, if you've registered for Log Lunch with Melissa Kemp, that is on, that's now full, so hopefully you've registered if you plan to come. That's at noon at the Log. At 2 o'clock tomorrow, also at the Log, there's a discussion with former and recent and less recent directors of the Center for Environmental Studies, Tom Dorling and Bill Muma, Roger Bolton, Hank Art, Karen Merrill, Jennifer French, facilitated by the current director, Professor Ralph Bradford. That's at 2 o'clock tomorrow at the Log. Should be very interesting. And tomorrow at 4 o'clock at Images is a film called Confronting Climate Change that we made at CES last year with Betsy Colbert, who interviewed the climate speakers who came to campus. And then dinner, if for the visitors who registered for dinner, there's going to be a dinner conversation with the current faculty tomorrow evening, Nick Howe, Pia Kohler, and Laura Martin, about where we're going in the future, and mostly hearing your ideas. So let me know if you have any questions about what's going on. And with that, introduce Hank.
Well, this is amazing. And a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for your various journeys that you have taken both since Williams and in the last couple of days to get here, to help us celebrate, or join with us in celebrating a half a century of the Center for Environmental Studies at Williams. It's heartwarming to see all of you here, and on a day like today, one needs a bit of heartwarming. So these are not easy times for the biosphere, nor are they easy times for environmental communities and ecosystems that we are most direct members of and which we depend upon. This is not a time for simplistic linear thinking by our nation's leaders, but the complexity of solutions for striving toward more sustainable futures in an era of disarray of the physical, biological, and political environment may be an opportunity for our renewed focus on and energy applied to local, national, and global solutions, or perhaps not. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of facilitating a presentation and discussion of how we collectively can move forward in achieving environmental goals in a time of Trump, the role of not-for-profit business and foundation sectors. We will start with a talk by Ned Sullivan, class of 1976, and then have responsive remarks by Joe Cotter, class of 1981, and Lindi von Mutius, class of 2003. Following these presentations, the floor will be open for your participation. But first, let me introduce the panelists. Ned Sullivan is the president of Scenic Hudson, a 50-year-old not-for-profit that preserves land and working farms, creates parks, and fights the threats to the Hudson River and its valley that are the foundation of the region's prosperity. He is a class of 1976 alum in political science and environmental studies, and earned his MBA and Masters of Environmental Science from Yale. Between college and graduate school, he spent 50 days climbing Mount Denali with other Williams friends, and is an avid cross-country skier, cyclist, and kayaker. During his career, he served as Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and later the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, as well as being a Managing Director of Public and Project Finance at the Bank of Boston. Joe Cotter is the founder of National Resources, which is a leader in the redevelopment of some of America's largest industrial sites. National Resources has been best known for its landmark Hudson River waterfront residences and its innovative iParks. I will let Joe show you what an iPark is in his presentation. National Resources has developed over 2 million square feet of commercial development and 1,000 waterfront residential units in the New York metro area. National Resources also specialized in alternative energy and sustainable development with projects in solar power, geothermal, and renewable transmissions. The company also has been a pioneer in the local produce to farm to table movement with small farms and restaurants. Mr. Cotter has been active in real estate investment and development for over 25 years. He began his career as an associate of Salomon Brothers, where he worked in the mortgage finance and the GNMA areas. He graduated from Williams College in 1981 and completed graduate study at Oxford University. He received an MBA from New York University. And finally, Lindi von Mutius, class of 2003. You thought she was with the Environmental Defense Fund, but surprise, she's now with the Sierra Club. She is the chief of staff for the Sierra Club, where she works on a day-to-day project management and is an active voice on organizational changes and strategic decisions. She provides insights on the full range of the club's work and identifies opportunities to develop and strengthen its reach and effectiveness. Prior to joining the Sierra Club, Lindi worked at Environmental Defense Fund as the Director of Program Management. In that role, she served as de facto Chief of Staff for EDF's Executive Director and worked closely with several programs and was a liaison to EDF's global offices. Before EDF, Lindi worked as the Director of Government and Legal Affairs at the representative of German industry and trade, lobbying on Toxic Substance Control Act, energy efficiency regulations, and trade policy. She is a native of Essen, Germany, and received her BA in Environmental Studies and History from Williams. She then received an ALM in Environmental Management from Harvard, where she assisted the city of Cambridge in managing their renewable energy fleet, and served as a research associate for the Great Ape World Heritage Species Project. Apes and mass transit. It just kind of goes together, doesn't it? That was in collaboration with UNESCO. She earned a JD from Vermont Law School, where she served as a research assistant in the U.S.-China Partnership for Environmental Law. So after that introduction, let me turn the proceedings over to Ned Sullivan, who will give the more or less the keynote address of this afternoon. It's all yours, Ned. Here's the, okay, great. That should work.
So, good afternoon. It's great to be here, and on this august occasion with so many people from past days and current days at Williams. This is the place, the Center for Environmental Studies, where my somewhat foggy commitment to doing good in the world and my passion for the environment were melded together in a commitment to a lifelong career in environmental protection. We were inspired during our time here by people like Tom Jorling, Hank Art, Bill Mumau, John Usden, Roger Bolton, Chief Satterthwaite, and others who were leaders, even giants in their field, who had made a difference at the national, regional level, and were imparting their wisdom, their knowledge, and their inspiration to us and helping us imagine what it would be like to be out in the world working to protect the environment, working to affect change in some way, in some context. One of the last times I was in this building, and I don't see Reed Zars here, I was going to make a long suppressed confession on behalf of both of us, because one day we snuck in here in the early hours of the morning. I think it was Prank Week at Williams. Does that still happen? Is there a Prank Week?
It's prank year.
Prank year, right. We all wish it were just a joke. And anyway, we snuck in here, and hopefully the statute of limitations has now run its course. And we locked all the doors from the inside and rappelled out, worked our way up to the top floor and rappelled out the windows. Anyway, we weren't caught, and I won't tell you the ending of the story, but it was an exciting time for us. I've had a very varied career, as Hank noted, and I think my own career and what you've just heard about Joe's and Lindi are a lesson in themselves, that there are so many different ways to have an impact on the environment, to make a difference, whether it's in business, in the not-for-profit sector, or as a backcountry ranger. I was fortunate after some time in government service, in banking and government service, having the privilege of working for Tom Jorling at the Department of Environmental Conservation, to find my way to Scenic Hudson. And there's always a Williams connection in my job. And it was Bob Bendick, who, a giant himself in the environmental conservation world, a leader at the Nature Conservancy, a spokesman for an implementer of large landscape conservation, and who tipped me off to the opportunity to work for Scenic Hudson. And that was 18 years ago. And it's really been a privilege to serve at this organization with a storied genesis and a history of having big impacts on a regional basis. Scenic Hudson's mission, what we do is we preserve land and working farms throughout the Hudson Valley while fighting the threats to the natural resources that are the foundation of the region's prosperity. Our vision is about bringing the entire Hudson Valley together as a community of informed and engaged citizens who are going to work to make the region a model of sustainability. Great cities and towns, livable, walkable communities that are surrounded by trails surrounded by parks, connected by trails, and prosperous agricultural lands. But the key concept here is everybody working together with a shared vision, a shared sense of identity in the region. Our beginnings are important and historic. Scenic Hudson's founders, some 54 years ago, resolved to prevent Con Edison from building a power plant on Storm King Mountain, and filed the first lawsuit to stop that pump storage facility that would have generated peak period electricity for the New York City market. It took 17 years before that battle was won. But in the second year of the fight, the courts upheld our founders' right of citizen standing to be in court and to defend this mountain on behalf of the larger community. That decision, known in the law books as the Scenic Hudson decision, was the foundation of the National Environmental Policy Act and a whole body of environmental law that gave citizens a voice in protecting the environment and led to the creation of hundreds, if not thousands, of environmental organizations across the country. So with those laws on the books, Scenic Hudson and other organizations across the country have stood up for years and been able to rely on a body of law that has enabled us to protect the key resources in our community that give a sense of place and majesty to where we live and work. In the aftermath of that successful battle, Scenic Hudson went on to become a regional organization, saving land across the entire valley, protecting 40,000 acres of both land along the river and working agricultural lands, creating 65 parks and preserves that link people to the beauty and inspirational power of the Hudson, and transforming waterfronts, defending them and transforming them. On the top, you see a proposal for the city of Yonkers back in the mid-'80s, 6 38-story high-rise towers that would have forever blocked the public from accessing the river and the beautiful views of the Palisades, which you see across the river. Now there's a public esplanade there. There's a beautiful mixed-use development, residential, but it's set back from the river, largely low to mid-rise buildings. A beautiful restaurant called X2O, check it out sometime. And just upriver from the Hudson, a tributary known as the Sawmill. Who here has driven on the Sawmill River Parkway? Well, there's a river that runs alongside of the parkway, and it veers over, under, and passes largely anonymously through the city of Yonkers. And because during the 20th century it was so contaminated, so polluted and smelly, that they decided to put it into a pipe and build a parking lot on top of it. So that's the picture on the left. But some years ago, Governor Pataki said to me, "Ned, I want to see that river opened up, and if you figure out how to do it, I'll provide the funding for it." So we walked under the city, we figured out where we could do that, and we transformed this parking lot into a beautiful urban park. And Joe has been developing land right next to it, some of which you see in the picture over here. This is one of his iParks. So this has caused, great revitalization of downtown Yonkers, but brought back to life a wonderful urban area as a park and a watercourse. In Tarrytown, we have taken, working again with Joe, we've taken an asphalt plant and removed it and created Scenic Hudson Park at Tarrytown. You'll hear more about that shortly. In Irvington, we took an industrial lumber yard and turned it into a beautiful park next to a mixed-use development. And in Beacon, we bought land that looked much like this with bulk storage tanks on it and turned it into a beautiful park and there's kayak facilities there, and also just upriver, we helped bring the Dia Beacon, with Tom Jorling's help, an abandoned Nabisco box factory that is now 300,000 square foot 20th century art museum to the Beacon waterfront. So all along the Hudson, we have transformed contaminated industrial sites and turned them into vibrant waterfronts. We've also adhered to our original founding mission, defended the region from an industrial cement plant, a coal-fired cement plant, advocated for the cleanup of the Hudson from PCBs, and now we are fighting off the transformation of the Hudson into a crude oil superhighway. So we've made a difference over the years by working in coalition, maintaining relations with government officials at every level of government, providing coordinated leadership among the different environmental groups in the Hudson Valley, and gathering people with diverse talents and skills to be strong advocates based on good science. So, but now we see the country has been transformed in an election. And while the political winds have shifted over the decades that I've been involved in environmental protection, the Trump administration's anti-regulatory agenda is truly a massive tidal wave, breaking over the very foundations of 20th and 21st century environmental protections. The laws are under attack, funding is threatened, and political polarization that we see in the country is itself an obstacle to progress. So what do we do in the face of this? First, we stick to our mission. We identify what are the core goals that we have and how can we achieve them in a more strategic and effective way despite the tremendous obstacles that we face. One of the areas that we have found it easy to continue to implement our mission is in land conservation. Love of the land crosses party lines. People want to save the critical resources in and surrounding their communities, whether it's a small park or an entire landscape scale opportunity to preserve farmland or open space. And conservation is a critical tool in fighting climate change, even as efforts are made to undermine those efforts nationwide. It's also critical, second, that we speak out. We need to stand up and speak truth to power. This is Haley Carlock, our Director of Environmental Advocacy, joined by New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman in speaking out against the Trump administration's evisceration of the waters of the United States and drastic budget cuts of the environmental protection agencies. So we're speaking out publicly when we feel it's going to achieve an outcome. But we're also broadening our coalitions, looking for allies in urban areas where we can work with them both to conserve and revitalize resources, to educate them to their opportunities for civic engagement so that their voices can be heard. We've also identified the crucial laws and regulations that are the foundation of our work and the ones that we're going to fight the hardest to preserve. We can't take on all of the assaults that we face nationwide, but we've identified the ones that are most important to the Hudson Valley at both the national and state level, and we're also looking for opportunities to strengthen state authorities that can be used as a defense against bad actions at the federal level. So a couple of case studies. One is our 30-year campaign to clean up the PCBs dumped in the river by General Electric. This is something that I worked on when I was at the Department of Environmental Conservation, and a cause that I took up because it was a crucial signature issue for Scenic Hudson. We had some success during the Obama administration at getting hotspot cleanup in the upper Hudson River north of Troy, a 40-mile stretch of river that has been largely contaminated by PCB discharges from their upriver plants at Fort Edward and Hudson Falls. And a hotspot cleanup was completed, but it became clear in the final years of a 6-year cleanup that GE was going to be leaving behind very large quantities, 2 to 3 times more than was known to exist in the river at the time that the cleanup plan was determined by the EPA. So we began a campaign to get EPA to expand the cleanup, and the Obama administration refused. So they refused right up till the final days that the administration was in office, and I was literally in touch with the White House and the EPA Administrator's Office on the day before Trump took office. And they refused to make the changes that they could have in the stroke of a pen. But we haven't given up, and we are not a nonpartisan group. We work with both Democratic and Republican administrations. We play the ball where it lies. So with a new set of lobbyists who have strong ties to the Republican Party but are truly dedicated to environmental outcomes, we have been able to get into the administrator's office, to get the head of the Superfund program to come to the Upper Hudson, and to begin to work with the regional office with its new director to try to get a change of policy. And we'll know in the next few weeks whether we've been successful. EPA is about to issue a crucial review that will determine whether GE is liable for additional cleanup or not. I say I'm guardedly pessimistic that we'll achieve our goal. So another thing, as I mentioned, during the Obama administration, and we really largely considered the Obama administration to be our friend nationwide, but also during that term, we saw the Hudson transformed into a superhighway for transportation of crude oil. Because of fracking, in North Dakota, there was a very large supply of crude oil produced that had nowhere to go other than to be taken by freight train across the country to Albany and down the Hudson in barges and super tankers. And to accommodate this massive growth that went from virtually none to huge quantities going down the river, the Coast Guard proposed creating 43 long-term anchorage sites in 10 different locations between Yonkers and Kingston and Rhine Cliff that would allow oil barges to anchor for up to 30 days. This would have been literally turning the Hudson into an industrial parking lot for crude oil. So we mounted a major campaign. We generated 10,000 comments on the proposal, and during the new administration, the Coast Guard announced that they were suspending the rulemaking. And they have instead convened a port and waterway safety assessment, basically a roundtable where we're sitting across the table from the Coast Guard itself, the tug pilots, the captains of the ships that you're seeing. And this is actually just one of the anchorage areas off of Yonkers, where they would have allowed 16 barges to be anchored in the middle of the river, just like that. So that proposal is off the table for the moment, and we spent 4 days of the last 2 weeks in hotel ballrooms with our adversaries in this context, trying to find common ground. And I'm actually confident, or I should say guardedly pessimistic, that the proposal for the long-term anchorages, 30-day parking lots, will not move forward. There may still be a proposal for emergency anchorages, which makes sense. We don't want these pilots to be moving their cargo up the river when they consider the conditions unsafe. So I think to conclude, we have taken a number of key strategic actions since the Trump administration has come to office. We have recommitted ourselves to our core mission and are moving forward with it strategically. We are broadening the coalitions that we're working with, and particularly to include business representatives. When I met in Washington last week with the top advisor to Administrator Pruitt, top policy advisor on the Superfund program, the president of the Chamber of Commerce of the Upper Hudson area was by my side, and he's as much an advocate for this as I am. We are speaking out when necessary in public, but we're also looking for our strategic opportunities where we can identify win-win outcomes with both the administration and the people, like the pilots of the ships, who need to conduct their business safely. So I think the bottom line in this climate is for people not to be afraid, to not succumb to the tidal wave, but to speak up when you see your values, your mission jeopardized. Edmund Burke had a quote that I think is fitting to end with, and he said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil in the world is for good men, and I would add women, to do nothing in the face of evil." So with that, I thank you and welcome Joe Cotter. So Joe,
Yeah, just tell me, just
all you
press.
need to do is press that and your video will start. So
Great.
do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, hi, my name is Joe Cotter. My path at Williams wasn't quite as inspired or as informed as my two other panelists. But I do want to say that Williams probably taught me two very important things. One is to continue learning, that life's an ongoing learning process, and the power of collaboration. And I want to report back that Ned and the work that Scenic Hudson has done is an inspiration to all of us, and I think you probably can't even estimate the impact he's had in our region, in the Hudson Valley. And one of Ned's many talents is the ability to go across the aisles and bring people together in partnership and collaboration, and I think that's an art that's so sorely missing in today's environment. Ned did a better job than I could of talking about the Trump administration and some of the all-out assault on the environmental regulations and the various setbacks and rollbacks of clean water and clean air. It's created a climate of chaos, but being an optimist, being on the real estate development side, one tries to be as optimistic as possible. So what we see, and a different take on this, is we see a real vacuum in leadership. And we see an opportunity, particularly at the local level, and I think you're seeing that the whole environmental movement, if you will, is devolving to more of a grassroots on a local level. And I think we're seeing such a vacuum in Washington, and I think what Ned pointed out is standing up and communities standing up and people on a much more localized level. I think you can really feel it happening because it's going on in all of our communities. This vacuum of leadership, though, one likes to look at some of the opportunities, and I'm going to just share with you some of the experiences while we sit across the table from groups like Scenic Hudson and not quite the Sierra Club, but different groups, and we try to come up with solutions for communities, because a lot of communities have problems where something needs to happen. When factories and big industry leaves communities, they leave holes, they leave vacuums, they leave, frankly, our corporate, some of our largest corporations leave a lot of contamination and leave a very polluted and terrible environmental condition behind. And it's been left for years because there's some paralysis. So to sort of break that paralysis, one has to come together, and there are sort of lightning rods and people like Ned Sullivan and groups like his that decide that unless we get this off center, we have to bring both sides together. So that's kind of our story. I'm going to just give you one of the projects that we worked on, and the first minute's a little bit of a commercial, but it gets to more appropriate, so sorry, couldn't edit it. Oh, Ned, is this I want to go back to, sorry, Ned, maybe you could help me on on the video itself. Oh, maybe.
At this time, we thought it would be interesting to review the history of Hudson Harbor and explore a little bit of the background of what has occurred here over the years on this very site in Tarrytown. The Tarrytown waterfront has been active since the mid-1600s, when it served as a docking area for early travelers. By the 1800s, the waterfront was primarily industrialized and there were a number of lumber yards and established trading posts that would ship their goods and services up and down the river. The peak activity, however, would occur in the 1950s, right after the war. Founded by Frank Cooney Sr., an expansive waterfront materials shipping and receiving area was established, which included 6 concrete plants and 3 asphalt plants. One could say that almost all of Westchester was built with the materials that came through the Cooney dockyard. The Tappan Zee Bridge was one of the major projects constructed during this time. But as times changed, so too did the waterfront. To the north, in Sleepy Hollow, the General Motors plant, which bustled with activity through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was closed in the mid-80s. This led to an abandonment of the waterfront. No longer was there a demand for warehouses and industry. These changes created a derelict and run-down waterfront. This state of abandonment would last well into the late 90s. At this same time, National Resources had started to assemble various parcels of land along the Hudson waterfront, which would ultimately lead it to Tarrytown and the county asphalt plant. National Resources' acquisition of this waterfront property would begin a new chapter in the transformation of the Tarrytown waterfront, one which would culminate in the creation of Hudson Harbor as we know it today. Fast forward to present day, and Hudson Harbor has become Westchester's crown jewel of development, widely regarded as one of the most visionary projects ever conceived along the waterfront in this county. It benefits greatly from its exciting architecture and the use of natural materials such as stone, reclaimed timber, and slate. Most importantly, however, Hudson Harbor is a people place, and this is what truly makes Hudson Harbor unique. The fact that people choose to come from all over the country to visit and live on this specific stretch of waterfront. The fact that they are drawn to Hudson Harbor for its parks, its attractiveness, architectural design, and the connection to the water that it offers. This unparalleled connection to the river, which Hudson Harbor offers, did not happen by mistake. The real story at Hudson Harbor lies with its historic environmental conditions and its former industrial past. Beginning in 1919, Westchester Lighting, a predecessor to Con Edison, manufactured coal gas on the site, which was used to light the village of Tarrytown. The waste from this process was left at the site. Coupled with further contaminants from the county asphalt operations, these environmental conditions required remediation prior to the reuse of the site. In order to accomplish this, National Resources underwent a highly complex and coordinated effort which entailed agreements with over 17 stakeholders, including Con Edison, the New York State DEC, the Village of Tarrytown, Westchester County, the Riverkeeper, Scenic Hudson, and the Greenway Conservancy. The end product was a reuse plan that was widely accepted by the community. This effort, which took the better part of 3 years to achieve, is often the untold story of Hudson Harbor. National Resources led a sophisticated team of professionals, which included Haley & Aldrich, GZA, Lessard Architects, Chazen Engineering and Surveying, and some 4 law firms to coordinate and implement the environmental work plan, which was accomplished in conjunction with the installation of the infrastructure required by the site plan. This detailed coordination of construction and remediation is at the heart of the brownfield redevelopment process. This process took over 2 years to complete, but demonstrates the extreme difficulty in redeveloping these types of sites. Challenges included removal of very deep soil contaminants, sophisticated control of the groundwater, and extensive work in the river with a limited time frame due to constraints relating to the underwater habitat and migration patterns of the sturgeon. Hudson Harbor's waterfront community now speaks for itself, but one should never forget the amount of painstaking planning and coordination that was required to get to this point today. This is the real accomplishment at Hudson Harbor. This is what we celebrate.
The first part was a commercial. The second part, we tell our environmental consultants, is environmental porn. So I say that for what it's worth. Our our company sort of prides itself on the triple bottom line, where we try to do people, planet, and profit. So we think that this, it particularly is appropriate given the current environment that we're in, because given some of the challenges Ned spoke to. But the opportunities, as we see them, there are a number of megatrends that are occurring that have huge implications for the environment, but create huge opportunities for the private sector as well as the nonprofit world. But housing's become an incredibly controversial and important element in society, and the rise of inequality has profound implications. We're finding ourselves with a completely bifurcated development world where we have the super luxury. You may have heard of all the very expensive condominiums and houses in places like San Francisco and New York City. And then there's really nothing in the middle, and then we're faced with this huge crisis in affordable housing. So you're seeing a real focus on smaller living, smaller footprints, more of an environmental friendly footprint. And I think this creates very exciting opportunities for the private sector to come together. We have a project in Yonkers, which is, this is kind of our New Yorker version of what's going on in Yonkers. It's trying to sort of morph towards a Williamsburg or a Hoboken, if you will. But what we've done there, and it's built right along the Sawmill River daylighting, which Ned spoke to, is right in the center there. So it has sparked economic development and renewal of a very, it's kind of was like the North Adams of its day. It peaked with the Otis elevator. Otis moved out, and for 20 years it was derelict. So now we're taking advantage, smart growth, if you will, of all the infrastructure in place and sort of rebuilding. But what's come out of this, which is quite innovative, is we've created what we're calling micro apartments. So we have units that are about 400 square feet, and they're designed to attract millennials, and it's actually working. Their starting price is about $1,500 per month, and it's almost a direct hit with the what was expected, what very rarely happens. But we're getting a lot of young people from New York City who basically want an extension of college. They want a small studio, they want a nice club room, they want a place to hang out, and no one wants to really stay in the room anyway. And fortunately, we're at a train station, so these are some of the units. They have Murphy beds and things like that. But this has a profound impact on how we use our resources as a society, and it's certainly one of the challenges that we look towards and look forward to. Another area that has great opportunity is the renewable energy field. And I think this is really where there's a need for creativity in the private sector and coming together, because the tax incentives and the programs that are there cannot last forever. You're seeing countries like Germany, which was a pioneer, and we have so many challenges with sort of some of the solar panels that are produced at very low cost in China. But the point of it is, unless we get a sustainable economic model, the change that's needed in society won't occur at the pace we need it to be. That being said, the opportunities for clean energy and clean tech in this area probably are the most exciting things I think we're going to see in our society. For better or worse, as much as the Trump administration wants to declare that coal is back, they've missed the boat. The market has already gone ahead of it. Natural gas now is so inexpensive that coal probably, from a pure economic standpoint, will never be a factor in our energy production because of the low-cost natural gas and the way that the private sector has gotten ahead of it. So we look forward to the clean tech, the clean energy revolution, and people like some of our students at Williams coming up with the next new thing, because we think that that will probably transform the environment at a much faster pace than what our governments can do. So that's kind of our feeling on that. Last but not least, our company has been involved in, we were one of the pioneers in the farm-to-table movement. Scenic Hudson has been preserving a lot of farmland, but we have a number of small farm-to-table restaurants, and we are also working on building quite a large hydroponic farm in Dutchess County that will make lettuce, or grow lettuce rather. But we think that this is another trend that will continue to reduce our environmental footprint and things like that. So those are some of the opportunities that we see, as we call them, megatrends, if you will, that the private sector is working on. So on that note, I think I'll pass the baton to Lindi.
Okay, well, thank you both. And thank you, Hank. It's really exciting for me to be here. My job as Chief of Staff is 100% behind the scenes. So I love that about my job. I get to write speeches for other people to give. And I was joking with my boss today about how I actually am going to try and give one now. I am going to basically tie up the threads that you've heard from both John and Ned, and basically drive home that point about partnerships and how we need all hands on deck in today's environmental movement. As Hank said, I, until very recently, about 3 weeks ago, worked at the Environmental Defense Fund, and the EDF, some of you may know it, is a much more middle-of-the-road, science-driven type of an organization. Sierra Club tends to be seen as further left of EDF. So I'd like to share stories from both of those organizations and some of the other work that I've done with you today, just to give you a sense of what's happening. But before I launch into that, can I, and I won't judge the room, I promise, can I just see a show of hands of who here is a member of the Sierra Club? Yeah, all right. So you guys are actually our most popular demographic. And when I looked around the room, I thought, all right, cool. So thank you very much. Our membership has grown in the last year by 1.5 million new members. So yeah, so we have 3.5 million members and about 800,000 people who aren't members in that they don't give us a donation, but they are called new champions, which means they go and talk to their neighbors and they sign petitions and they do work for us that doesn't involve giving us money and getting tote bags in return. So we're really, really grateful to our members because you are the backbone of the work that we do. And I'm so thrilled that I get to meet some of you today. My message is one of also of hope and optimism, even under the Trump administration. And the work that organizations like EDF and Sierra Club are doing to make sure the environmental movement grows not only in size, but also significance and efficacy under the Trump era, so that our bedrock bipartisan environmental health and safety laws survive this polarized political climate. Quinnipiac University, which does a bi-weekly study of voters across the country, recently asked voters in the elections that happened a couple weeks ago what the most important problem facing the country right now is. And they gave them the choices: economy, healthcare, immigration, terrorism, the environment, foreign policy, or race relations. The environment ranked as the lowest of the problem areas. So some days I have to remind myself that I work in an echo chamber where I think environmental issues are the most critical problem that we've ever faced. But that's really not where most Americans are. And that as a result, we're in a critical time in the environmental movement where we have a choice. We can either create a more just and equitable environmental movement that sort of is relevant and inclusive and works and looks at environmental solutions in the context of these other tensions that tug at the web of our society, or we can keep doing what we were always doing. So I obviously think the first option is better, and I'm going to talk to you about how we're doing that work. And also, with a little bit of humility about the Sierra Club's own history. We were founded 125 years ago by John Muir. That makes us the oldest and most awesome environmental organization ever. But John Muir is a complicated figure. I don't know how many of you know, have read some of his less inspiring writings, where he is all about eugenics and forcible removal of Native Americans and says slavery is fine. So he is a problematic figure as well. And we have to think about the fact that the environmental movement has often been a movement of people that look a lot like everybody in this room, and that we've left people behind, and that's one of the tensions that tug at the seams of our society today. So I'd like to share with you one really successful example of this new, more inclusive approach to environmental work. It comes from the San Gabriel's Mountains of Los Angeles. So you may know that the San Gabriel Mountain range is now a national monument. It's outside of LA, and the national forest lands are sort of in the backyard. I mean, it's right up against this big urban population that also has a vital stake in the future of these lands. And so traditionally, the Sierra Club has gone about protecting areas like this with member advocacy and promoting a pristine, protected, roadless, good for wildlife area. We started doing that, and it was in direct conflict to the very active, vocal Latino community that bordered this land that wanted a space where they could have picnic areas with parking and swimming and restrooms and multilingual signage that would welcome nature lovers not ready to rough it in the backcountry. Ultimately, we decided to work with that community, and so community groups and conservationists were able to develop a joint proposal. And only once we developed the joint proposal did the Obama administration decide to support the creation of that national monument. Because President Obama, who has had, we don't always love everything he did in the environmental movement, but he had a real vision as well that the environmental movement needed to be much more inclusive. And so this monument is now a really great testament and speaks to the power of what working with groups that we haven't traditionally worked with can do. So I'm very proud of the work we're doing, and I want to share some of that with you today, but I also wanted to say to the students in this room and up in the rafters there, as you throw yourselves into the work of environmental protection, and I thank you for that, I hope you'll stay optimistic about creating a future that not only protects the environment, but also offers prosperity for all stakeholders. So we live in extraordinary times. And nobody voted for dirty air, water, or ignoring climate science. President Trump's agenda is deeply unpopular. 64% of Americans say he doesn't share their values, and his environmental policies are actually the least popular of all. 70% of voters wanted to stay in the U.S., wanted the U.S. to stay in the Paris Agreement. The only demographic that didn't want to stay in the Paris Agreement by wide margins were white men between age 36 and 56. So we got to figure out what's going on there. Every other listed party by gender, education, age, and racial group favors being part of the Paris Agreement by wide margins, and 64% of American voters are either very concerned or somewhat concerned that they or a family member will be personally affected by climate change. But here we are, standing by a parade of horribles, and it feels like it never stops every 2 weeks. So it's really hard being green. And I don't want you to think that you should not be freaking out, because you totally should be. But I am here to tell you that there's optimism to be had. So after the election, both Sierra Club and EDF and several of the other large green groups came up with revised strategies for how to do what we do. EDF calls it the action framework. We call it resist, recruit, train, and sustain. And I want to give you each a few examples of these 4 ideas. So under resist, the bold language is that we refuse to accept or comply with the agenda promoted by Trump and his corporate-backed enablers at the federal and state level. That sounds pretty out there. What we mean by that is we're going to work with everyone to make sure that oil and gas lobbyists don't control the EPA. And I promise I didn't put any pictures of Scott Pruitt in my presentation because he makes my heart hurt. But, but we have been doing a lot of work with corporations, large and small, but especially with large multinational corporations. And we saw them as the strongest and most vocal supporters of the Paris Agreement. When Donald Trump, they were doing huge media buys. I mean, Google, Apple, they put full-page ads in the New York Times every day leading up to the decision about the Paris Agreement. These companies are already doing really good work. Google is almost at 100% renewable energy. Apple is at 100% renewable energy. I'm going to tell you a little bit later about Walmart, which is doing amazing things. So these companies really worked hard. Even Exxon and Chevron, I mean, were extremely vocal about staying in the Paris Agreement. And after Trump made his decision to withdraw the U.S. in 2020, these companies banded together and formed an organization called We Are Still In. And it aims to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement with corporate efforts so that we don't, as a country, get off track. So that's really exciting. And it's a form of corporate resistance that I am extremely proud to be part of. I also want to talk about Moms Clean Air Force. Moms Clean Air Force is a voluntary group of 1.2 million mothers across the country who want clean air. And Moms Clean Air Force became a powerhouse after the election. I have never marched so much in my entire life as I have been marching with the moms. I am not a mom, and I'm marching with the moms. And I helped them organize a lobby day where we had about 300 moms and kids come take over Capitol Hill and meet with their elected representatives, talk about climate change and talk about clean energy. The moms are marching once a week somewhere in the country. The Women's March was actively supported by both EDF and the Sierra Club, as was the Climate March, as was the March for Science. So a lot of marching. I'm running out of cool slogans for posters, but it's been fun. And then where would we be without our billionaires? So our billionaires have also been doing great things. At the back of my boss's office, there's a whiteboard with all the people he needs to call that week. And these three guys are always on that board. He talks to them once a month, and he's not the only environmentalist to do so. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, who decided he was going to be a leader on climate change about 4 years ago, has been extremely vocal since Donald Trump was elected. And I want to share a quote with you from one of the talks he recently gave. In Bonn, actually, at the Climate Summit. He said, "To achieve a clean energy future, we must communicate better. If you're going to inspire the world, it is time to forget about the old way of talking about climate change, where we use guilt and blame. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. There's a new way to talk about it. A sexy way, a hip way, a snappy way to go about it, which is to bring people into the movement." And I think that really captures the spirit of what we're all trying to do. Mayor Bloomberg has been leading the way to encourage cities across America to join the We Are Still In campaign, and has now crystallized that into a 100 Resilient Cities effort in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. Some of you may have heard about this. It's trying to get 100 American cities, those that are responsible for 70% of climate emissions in this country, to join a commitment to go fully renewable. And we've gotten about 70 cities on board now. 2 days ago, we met with the mayor of Oakland, and she decided to commit to the campaign. So that was really exciting. And Mayor Bloomberg has also been throwing a lot of money at retiring coal plants. So when you think about the ability for local governments to make a real difference, I like to call it the subnational level. Mayor Bloomberg is very fond of saying that the federal government is missing in action right now, and state governments are almost all missing, but cities is where the real change can happen, because you can call your mayor up, and they usually will listen to you, and you can tell them about your kid that's in the hospital with asthma, with third attack this month. And cities are sort of on the front lines of this kind of change. So I would agree with what John said, that the environmental movement is becoming much more grassroots, because it has to be, because we can't count on the federal government for leadership at this time. And I think that's actually a very helpful evolution. And then finally, Leonardo, who's like my favorite, because I'm one of those millennials. Yeah, I still remember when he was awesome. Leonardo, he's marching with us in the climate march. He's getting right down to the grassroots level. And he has a great quote where he says, "To be clear, this is not about telling people to change their light bulbs or buy a hybrid car. This disaster of climate change has grown beyond the choices individuals make. This is now about our industries, our governments around the world taking decisive, large-scale action." And I think that, again, really highlights the focus on industries and governments and the grassroots movement working together. I want to tell you about recruiting others into the movement now. I have 4 small stories to share. The first is of a farmer in Iowa. We don't ask him who he voted for. We don't talk politics, but he is a very strong leader for the no-till crop rotation movement. And he was one of our champions in getting General Mills and Kellogg's to pledge that they would reduce fertilizer pollution by 40% last year. And fertilizer pollution is a real serious contributor to greenhouse gases, so this is a really amazing pledge. Once General Mills and Kellogg's got on board, other companies decided to get on board, and now we have commitments to protect 1 million acres of land in the Midwest, where they are going to reduce fertilizer pollution by 40%, using really cool drones that fly over the crops and like tell you where to put fertilizer so you're not just blanketing everything, and also using these no-till practices. So we're very excited about the work that we're doing with the Nature Conservancy and farmers to protect the land that is being used to feed all of us. Another really great corporate story that I want to share is Walmart, who I have to admit I was never always the biggest fan of for some of their other practices. Walmart has made a 180-degree turn in the last decade on being a real great partner in the environmental movement. And recently, Walmart launched something called Project Gigaton, which one of my colleagues at EDF helped to basically get off the ground with them. Project Gigaton is Walmart's commitment to remove a gigaton of carbon emissions from their supply chain. So I say a gigaton, which really doesn't mean much to, someone who isn't a climate scientist. So let me tell you, a gigaton of CO2 is equivalent to what the country of Germany emits in a year. So if you're thinking about Walmart is reducing carbon emissions by the size of Germany out of the atmosphere. And they are on the road to get that done by 2020, which is incredible. And when you think about how much market share Walmart has and the signals an actor like that sends through the rest of the market, you understand the scope of that commitment and the ripple effect it has all across the world. So the Chinese government is now creating a green supply chain task force as a result of Walmart saying, we're going to launch Project Gigaton, because the Chinese government thought, oh yeah, we should probably get on that, right? So we should probably make sure that our suppliers here in China can remain competitive and can remain part of Walmart's supply chain. So this is great work. I wanted to share with you also a story of a small group in Baltimore that I worked really closely with back when I was a lobbyist for the German government. And one of the things we've been working on is figuring out a way to turn the Baltimore Harbor, which is disgusting, no, that's like the scientific term for it. You can catch cholera from the Baltimore Harbor, so just so you know. Don't take a swim in there. Baltimore Harbor has a lot of problems, not only from industrial pollution, but also because there are outdated sewage lines and there's poor filtration. And there is a great group of activists, a bunch of scientists, water quality scientists, but also local community activists that have a project where every weekend a group of high schoolers goes out into the harbor in canoes and fishes garbage out, and they learn about water quality science. And we try and, really take the students from the poorest neighborhoods and give them like a fun day on the water that's sort of focused on environmental science. And I'm an avid kayaker, and so I led a lot of these. I fell into the Baltimore Harbor. I drank the water by accident. I did not get cholera, but I got very sick. And the doctors in the emergency room at UMD, they were not happy that I drank some harbor water. So that's how I know about that now. But anyway, we were working on a project to convince the city of Baltimore and Governor Hogan to adopt a proposal for turning Baltimore into a green harbor, into a 100% renewable energy run harbor. And I'm very pleased to say that they just adopted it 2 months ago. So, yay, Baltimore. So, so we're working on that. The EPA side of it, the cleanup side of it, we are much more nervous about now that Scott Pruitt is the administrator of the EPA. But Larry Hogan, the Republican governor of Maryland, is deeply committed to making this project happen. And so we are excited that we got a Republican governor on board with a clean energy project under the Trump administration. We are going to put that in the win column. And then finally, a really exciting project I got to work on at EDF was creating the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is a bipartisan group, Republican and Democratic members of Congress, who have committed to always voting for climate-friendly policies. So they're now up to 60 members, which is huge. And that got started last January, right around the inauguration. So the fact that we're at 60 members, especially 30 Republicans, is a pretty good thing. It's a pretty big deal, and I'm really, really proud of the members of Congress who do choose to stick up for climate policies in opposition to the administration. So the next leg, or I should say the third leg of the stool, is TRAIN. And TRAIN is basically a project to develop and host training opportunities for Sierra Club staff and volunteers and members to help build movement skills and effectively engage in our work, as well as understanding sort of movement building and campaigning skills for volunteer leaders. So before this election, we invested $4 million into TRAIN and into training local advocates who would go door to door. And you can see some of them in this picture here. This is my colleague Ramon, knocking on doors in Virginia to try and get local, hyper-local, not just state, not even state assembly, but even more like local elections, flipped to climate-friendly, environmentally friendly candidates. And we're proud to say that we won all of the races we worked on with local groups, except the one in Pueblo, Colorado, which was super narrow. But we have a great governor in Colorado. We're going to help him try and win again. And so we're focused now on 2018. But we were really, really pleased that, we made that investment in training local volunteers and people to take real action in their local elections. And I don't know if you happen to see that story in the Washington Post, but one of the candidates that we worked with is a woman who she was not able to participate in the Women's March because she had to work that day. And her local assemblyman tweeted a photo of a woman sitting at a stove cooking dinner, and underneath he said, "Well, I hope these women are home in time to make me dinner from their march." And then he was asked to apologize for that, and he said, "I'm not going to apologize." A woman's place is in the home. So he just went deeper down that awful rabbit hole. And she read that on Twitter, and she decided, you know what, I have no interest in politics really, but I'm going to run just because. I'm just going to run. And now she's the assemblywoman. So, woohoo! So, fun things are happening every day. I'm going to have to wrap things up. So, I'm going to quickly talk about Sustain. All I really want to say in Sustain is, there's my boss putting solar panels on his house. Sustain is all about sustaining the momentum that we are seeing right now and really focusing that energy on local and state victories across all of our issues. And we're playing defense at the national level, but we're hoping that we can actually accelerate progress at the local level. And one example of that is making solar panels affordable for people who don't have a lot of money. So we have a great project where we partner with a solar company in California. And if you make less than $80,000 combined income, household income, the solar company will come and put panels on your house for free. And whatever you earn, you pay towards sort of a minimum cost of maintenance of those panels. But it's a really cool project, and it's starting to help spread solar a little bit to lower income neighborhoods in the Bay Area. I want you to come fix our housing crisis, because I'm one of those millennials that lives in a tiny apartment. They all cost $4,000 though in San Francisco, so that's why I don't live in San Francisco. And then Burlington, Vermont, which has been 100% renewable since 2014 and is one of our big stars that we talk about when we're trying to recruit other cities. Burlington is not a wealthy city, so we always like to say, if they can do it, so can you. And finally, I just wanted to share with you that as you can see in the last 8 years, more solar and wind has popped up in Republican congressional districts than in Democratic ones. And it turns out that Texas is our national clean energy leader. And I think that, you know, there's a really, under the Trump administration, the rate of retirement of coal plants has accelerated, actually. Every 9 days, a coal plant goes out of business because, as Ned and John were saying, it's just not economically viable anymore. So we're not bringing that back no matter what Donald Trump wants to do. And what we are doing is working on bringing sustainable future to people, one local organization at a time. So thank you. I know, I have to end all slides with cute polar bears.
It's getting a bit late, but there might be time for 2 questions or comments from the audience.
I have a quick question for Ned. Is there Superfund money to help with cleaning up stuff still?
Well, there's a lot less than there once was because the Superfund doesn't exist anymore. There was a fund initially established, a Superfund, so that EPA could say either you do it or we'll do it and then we'll bill you for it. The EPA still has the authority to order General Electric to do the cleanup and then to go to court to make them pay for it.
One more? In the back.
Lindi, you mentioned in passing, I think, a 75% increase in membership, 2 million to 3.5 million.
Yes,
And
it's crazy. We didn't expect it.
how do you, I guess leverage that to a period when there's not such interest? Can you have staff now, even though you can't get much done, that set things up to be done in 5 or 10 years or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, that is the exact memo I just wrote for our board 2 days ago. So our board is having a meeting right now about how do we take all of this and make sure it doesn't go away next year. Because we don't expect that we're going to have another 1.5 million people join next year. We expect to keep these members and keep them engaged. And that's a lot of what Train and Sustain is all about. We added lots of new staff in our chapters so that the chapters would have more support and strength. And we set aside a special budget, actually, that we're hoping the board approves at this meeting to give local chapters more staff support and more resources so they can do this local outreach work. We're also trying to develop some cool new ideas for how we engage our members, like veterans, and creating veteran hiking programs, creating programs that address both the new members we've gotten in the younger demographic, as well as the members who we've gotten in more sort of diverse demographics. So we're working really hard on that. Another thing that I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about is our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in general as a club, because we think that that will help inform our work in a more sustainable way as this country changes, which it is doing. By 2024, I think Texas is going to be a blue state because the demographics will have changed. So our country is turning into something very different than it has been, and we want to make sure that we can keep up with that and be relevant and useful in that context. So that's a great question. I'd love to talk to you more about it. Could talk for days.
Question dinner later at the dinner. Well, let me ask you to join me in thanking the panel for this presentation.